Welcome to Mecum Presents On the Move, brought to you by State Farm. It's the show geared toward keeping you up to speed with the latest auto news, event coverage, and expert industry insight. Now, here are your hosts, Matt Avery and John Kraman.
Hey, and welcome to another On the Move. I'm Matt Avery, and joining me as co-host John Kraman, lead TV commentator for Mecum Auctions on NBCSN. John, today is very special as it marks the kickoff to Dana Mecum's 34th Original Spring Classic, held here in beautiful Indianapolis, Indiana, and that is the focus of today's show. Starting with in segment 2, we'll be checking in with friend of the show in NASCAR Hall of Famer Ray Evernham, and he's going to be filling us in on the brand new SRX race series that is launching very shortly and Ray has been heavily involved with. And then we'll also be having a discussion about two very special vehicles that Ray is connected with that are crossing the block later next week. And then in segment 3, you and I are going to be having a discussion about how did Mecum Indy get started, going back to its origins in 1988 and how it has grown today to be a massive event with so much excitement going on.
Yeah, it is a landmark year, Matt, to us with so much going on that we've talked about, obviously with the pandemic, to be able to get that Mecum Indy auction back on schedule at the traditional date of literally the week before the Indy 500, man, it's good to get back to some sense of normality here.
Absolutely. Now, John, speaking of excitement, there's a new copy of the Mecum magazine available at mecum.com. What were you writing about in your At the Redline column this month?
Seller strategies, Matt. And what I did is I took a little bit of a thought process on what are some tips that a consignor, a seller can do to help them have the best auction experience. So I invite everybody to go ahead and take a look at that. Free Revs is your monthly column. What did you write about?
The type of story that you and I love hearing, enthusiasts purchasing vehicles to rekindle memories from years ago. In this case, it was a Camaro collector who purchased a 69 Z28, such an iconic car, but he wanted it because he had one like it in high school in 1975. Such a great story, and there's a whole lot more all in the Mecum magazine, again, available at mecum.com. Now, John, while Indy is going on right now, will be for many more days, right after it, Mecum has other great events planned, including our debut in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the all-new Orlando Summer Special. What are the key details on those events?
Yep, going to be a busy summer, Matt. Kicking it off really in a good way. The Tulsa debut is occurring on June 11th and 12th, and then we head back down to Florida, this time to Orlando. First time there actually at this particular venue. Of course, we go to Kissimmee every year for the biggest auction on the Mecum schedule for what's being referred to as the Summer Special. And that's going to be a nice 1,000-car 3-day auction being held July 29th through the 31st. Frank Mecum says the consignment books are open for entry, so do not hesitate. That is an all-indoor, climate-controlled event. That's going to be fun, too.
Well, John, as we move further into summer, Mecum Auctions has continued to really lead the charge about bringing back live automotive events. And what's really nice is that others are starting to get events up rolling for the new summer season. So there's a lot of great national events taking place, starting with the Bloomington Gold Corvette Show. It will be held June 18th and the 19th in Lucas Oil Stadium here in Indianapolis. And John, you are going to be a featured speaker. What's your involvement with this event?
Yeah, there'll be several times I've actually participated in that. Guy Larson had asked me to do my seminar called Inside Auctions in the Collector Car Market. I'm always glad to do that. That's going to be fun. And Matt, this will be the first time ever that Camaros are included in the full range of Bloomington Gold events, including judging. So really looking forward to seeing not only the best Corvettes on the planet, but potentially some of the best Camaros on the planet as well.
Very cool. Well, John, one of the things that we have seen a sharp increase in with collector cars is driving. And man, one of the events that I think will be filled to capacity is the Hot Rod Power Tour, because it involves a whole lot of behind the wheel time. It is back for 2021. It took a year off last year, but it is coming back in force. It will be held August 23rd through the 27th, and it will be cruising through the Midwest heartland, starting at Summit Motorsports Park in Norwalk, Ohio. And and after a couple days of driving, it will be ending at the State Farm Center in Champaign, Illinois.
Yeah, and this is celebrating 27 years of the Hot Rod Power Tour. And keep in mind, after that is over with, they shift gears literally towards their drag week schedule, and that has been posted. And that is going to run mid-September at legendary racetracks such as Motorsport Park in Martin, Michigan, Summit Motorsports Park, Norwalk, Ohio, Lucas Oil Raceway, Indy, and our backyard, Byron Dragway, Byron, Illinois. And you and I were talking before we started the podcast today that we are both looking forward to attending that event in person this year.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Now, John, let's talk about some car news and specifically truck news coming out of Ford. They have announced that next week they're going to be revealing the all-new electric F-150 at their World headquarters in Dearborn, Michigan, and they also have confirmed something you and I thought was going to be the case. It will be called the Lightning, repurposing that performance moniker from years ago. It makes a lot of sense to have it be on this electric version. And something else that Ford has said is they have confirmed it will be quicker than those performance Lightnings.
Well, yeah, and no surprise that it's going to be quick accelerating, Matt. No surprise that they're at all joining a lot of the manufacturers, including, of course, Hummer, Chevrolet and GMC both announcing electric full-size trucks as well. So there's 3 right from General Motors. Some upstarts, Rivian, even Tesla now moving forward on their Cybertruck, it looks like, to get that into production. And they're starting to kind of hint out there that that might hit the market with a base price of around $35,000. So this is going to be pretty exciting next 1 to 2 years to see how all that shakes out.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of excitement in the truck market, including the arrival of Ford's all-new light-duty pickup truck, which is rumored to be called the Maverick. John, as a recap, what do we know about this vehicle so far?
Yeah, no official word from Ford, but a lot of information flying around, Matt. Looks like a pretty nifty little truck. There's been a lot of photos of it in camouflage. My guess is it's going to be based on the current platform being shared with the Ford Escape small SUV and also the Bronco Sport, which is currently in production right now. There's currently two powertrain choices. There's a 1.5-liter turbo and a 2-liter turbo. My guess is those will be the power plants, and I think they'll be available both in front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive versions as well. Should be hearing more about that as the summer goes on.
Keeping the theme on Ford, let's talk about another one of their icons, John, Mustang, because it looks like Mustang might be following Bronco's lead in kind of becoming its own sub-brand within the Ford family.
But looks like that's the way it's headed, Matt. We've been looking at clues actually over the years where Ford is really putting a lot of attention on iconic names such as Bronco and Mustang both. My guess is over the next 1 to 2 years is we're going to see both of those storied nameplates being brought out as an actual brand under the Ford umbrella. Nothing from Ford to confirm that yet, but it just seems like it's moving in that direction. And I, frankly, bit in favor of that.
Yeah, me too. Now, John, speaking of the Bronco, there's a little bit of excitement because Ford has said that it will be getting a horsepower bump.
Well, and horsepower is all good. Of course, the all-new Bronco, not out yet, but boy, going to be hitting the showrooms very, very soon. One of the hottest new vehicles onto the market. It has got a horsepower bump. Here's what they've done. The base engine's a 2.3-liter 270 horsepower. They bumped that to 300 horsepower, and they've taken the turbocharged 2.7-liter V6 that was rated at 310, and they've bumped that to 330 horsepower, but with a little bit of a caveat, Matt. They're saying that those horsepower levels can only be obtained when using premium fuel. Now, keep in mind, if you want a manual transmission in a Bronco, it's available, but only on the 2.3-liter four-cylinder. The base engine, also automatic optional on that, but the 2.7-liter will be an automatic transmission standard.
Mecum Auctions is proud to bring you On the Move with Matt Avery and John Cramen. For more on the world of collector cars, head over to mecum.com. Now let's get back to the show.
On the phone today, we have got a very special guest, previous guest of the show, by the way. We've got Ray Evernham. Ray, of course, probably best known for the success of crew chief, 3-time winning crew chief for Jeff Gordon. He's now been inducted in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. He's a racer. He's owned a race team. and one of the best, coolest all-around car guys, TV personality as well, one of the greatest car guys that I know. What we're going to be talking with Ray about is a couple of things today. First of all, the Superstar Racing Experience getting ready to get kicked off, known as SRX, and then a couple of really special cars headed to the Mecum Indy auction. So let's go ahead and begin, Ray. Thanks for joining Matt and I on the show today, and tell us how this SRX, the Superstar Racing Experience, got its genesis.
Wow, man! I'll tell you what. We got to go back. We got to go all the way back, and maybe not as far as when the wheel was invented, but a couple of guys in the early '70s. One of them named Roger Penske and Mark Donohue had an idea, about putting the best drivers in the world in equal cars, and that was called IROC. And so the DNA of everybody's multiple driver and equal car series, I think, has come from that. So I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that my first real professional job in racing was at IROC. So I learned a lot there. Oh. And in that time, I got to see how popular IROC was with the fans. And, as it came up, and then as the sports, motorsports changed and different things happened, drivers became harder to get, schedules got busier, there were sponsor conflicts, owner conflicts. It kind of took IROC, in a direction that it just wasn't favorable for it. And, George Pine, who's a former COO of NASCAR, and he was the president of IMG, and now is the president and CEO of Bruin Capital. He and I have been friends for a long time, and we've talked about, starting some other series in other countries and doing things. And we were batting around things. He said, "Ray, I'd still like to do something with you." And I said, George, we need to maybe bring back the IROC series. Something like that would be cool, but we could do it maybe using legendary drivers so there wouldn't be as many sponsor conflicts. I said, I think it'd be a good idea if we went to shorter tracks, kept the speeds down, so we didn't have to worry about aerodynamics. And it's just funny how fast things happen, John and Matt. But he said, hey, my buddy Sandy Montag, he's really great with a lot of TV, agents, one of the biggest TV agencies in New York. He says, let's tell him about it. So he told Sandy about it. And Sandy's like, that's a really good idea. Let's go across the street and see the guys at CBS. And so the guy we see at CBS happens to be Sean McManus, who's the boss there at CBS Sports. He goes, right. Oh wow, that's a great idea. Okay, we're in, and so it happened that fast, and I was like, okay, now be careful what you wish for. I got to get it done.
Who, along with you, who else are principals and decision makers in SRX?
Well, the partners are George Pine from Bruin Capital, Sandy Montag, myself, and Tony Stewart. Because Tony Stewart obviously loves any type of racing. Sure. So when we sat down with Tony and said, hey, we really need a driver involved in this, we'd like to have you, he jumped in. And then CBS is a certainly not in equity position, but they are a true partner in this series, handling all the TV production.
So it sounds like a really critical part of this, Ray, is the vehicles. Get us up to speed. What's the hardware that your team is using?
Well, the vehicles are key, but the one thing I stress about this series all the time is that this has got to be about the personalities of the drivers, right? So what we had to do was build a car that just was not a great race car at a certain place. Our number one thing was to be safe. We had to keep our drivers safe. And we needed to make sure that the car responded to the normal things that drivers input, right? That the steering wheel, the gas, the brake, the way that they move the wheel and the car transferred weight, all of the mechanical things that a driver is responsible for. So we started with a basic road race chassis. It's what they call it's based off of a Trans Am 2 type car. Tony Uri and the group over at Fury had a design. We changed some of the things on it, and we had them build us so it was straight up chassis. And I said, look, it's going to be a really good road race car. It's going to be pretty good on the dirt, and it's just going to be okay on the paved ovals. And that's kind of what we wanted because, if you remember the history of the IROC series, the road racers didn't really get a great shot because they weren't driving used to driving stock cars, and they didn't run dirt back then. So I think it'll be a good dirt car for everybody, and then it's not going to give the stock car guys an advantage on the paved ovals. And I think what we've designed in the car, Ken Schrader has been doing a fantastic job of doing the largest part of the testing. He's like, look, I think we've got something here. The car's driving good off the front wheels. It's way. We wanted a car that was way overpowered for the tire, so you'd have to save your tire, and you'd have to learn to control the throttle as the race went on. So we made a car that if you said to me, Ray, is this a really good race car? I'd say, no. No, you got to drive the heck out of this wherever you go. And we hope to create passing opportunities. And when you have a car, again, that is not perfect on a line, that it is overpowered, that creates the ability for a mistake, and which again, to me, creates an opportunity to pass.
Is there any inspiration from any current brand on the shape of the sheet metal? It looks pretty generic. And part two to this is, what have you guys chosen for a power plant, and what kind of weight are these cars, power to weight ratio? Fill us in on that.
Well, the inspiration for the design came from Johnny Cash. You get the one piece at a time. Remember the old Psycho Billy Cadillac?
Yeah, I do.
That's kind of like we got, we didn't want it to look like anything, but we wanted a piece of everything in it, right? Okay. So, we needed, the way the roof, greenhouse was designed. I might have leaned on the Dodge Challenger a little bit. It's big, flat, slab sides. If you looked at the car without a top on it, it almost looked like an old McLaren Can-Am car. Right? So, it was really about function. Some people look at it and go, that thing looks like a Mustang Cuda crashed into a Ferrari F40. And you're like, what's good about it is everybody's going to look at it and come up with something different. But it's a very, very functional body. And I think it's going to be interesting style-wise to the younger crowd. We did a lot with Pixar and the movie Cars 3, and I thought, as we're working on the design of this car, I want something that's cool for the kids to play with if we do die cast and things like that. So that's where that body design came. It has very, very little downforce. The Superbird Daytona style wing on the back really, it's more about the sides of it that gave us more room to put the sponsor decal than the downforce. Okay. It really doesn't do a lot. But now they are seriously overpowered. We partnered with Edelbrock and with the guys at Ilmor to use the LS-based engine. It's 396 cubic inches, and it is fuel injected. But we're running about 675 horsepower.
Wow.
The car has a 4-speed transmission, a quick change rear end, spur gear, so we can change from track to track. It's on a 10-inch steel wheel, Goodyear tires, bias ply tires, not radials, but Goodyear tires for the dirt and for the pavement. The car has a 24-gallon fuel cell in it, so full of fuel with driver, ready to go on the racetrack. It's just under 3,000 pounds. And we're going to, some of our drivers are 200 pounds and some of our drivers are 150 pounds. We're actually going to add the weight so that when the cars hit the racetrack, they're going to be relatively close.
Good deal. Glad to hear that.
Speaking of tracks, which ones will SRX be racing at? And also, how did you guys go about selecting those? Well,
one of the things about the Superstar experience was to take these drivers to places in the heartlands and grassroots America. Grassroots racing is really important, and a lot of our superstars that we have now grew up at these racetracks. So to take them back to places like Stafford Springs, Connecticut, which is halfway between Boston and New York City, but one of the most legendary and historic modified open wheel racing tracks on the Northeast. So we start there on June 12th, and we will be on CBS Network Television from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. prime time. So we run pavement, half-mile paved at Stafford Springs, Connecticut, and then we go to again, the home of one of the biggest sprint car races in the world, Knoxville, Iowa, on a beautiful half-mile dirt track. And then from Knoxville, Iowa, we go to Eldora, and Eldora, is a track owned by Tony Stewart. It's another half-mile dirt track. But when you talk about two of the most famous dirt tracks in America, you look at the people that ran at Eldora, the Andretti's, the Unsers, the Foyts. Those are the guys that ran there with the old USAC cars, and just the history at that place is incredible. So then we leave Eldora, and we go to Indianapolis Raceway Park, where again, super historical place right down the road from the Brickyard, where many of USAC's greatest drivers ran around there, including the guy that I worked with, Jeff Gordon, ran midgets and sprints there. And then we go out to Splinter, Wisconsin, which was on my bucket list of tracks because it is one of the most famous tracks out in that Wisconsin area. Guys that I've worked with, legendary guys, came out of Wisconsin, guys like Dave Marcus and Dick Trickle and the Sodders and Alan Kowicki, Matt Kenseth, and the people out there are just so happy to get us to come out. So we're going to have our superstars go and run at some of the toughest, most historic tracks in America in front of the fans.
Speaking of that, who are the drivers? Is the selection complete, and will it remain the same roster for the entire series?
That's a really good question, because we've got some horsepower in drivers coming, and the way that we're going to mix it up is we're going to have 10 full-time drivers, and those 10 full-time drivers are from NASCAR: Bill Elliott, Tony Stewart, Bobby Labonte, and Michael Waltrip.
Cool.
From IndyCar, we have Paul Tracy, Tony Kanaan, and Marco Andretti. And then from road racing, we have Ernie Francis Jr., the reigning Trans Am champion. Kids won 4 or 5 championships in a row. And Willie T. Ribbs, one of the legendary road racers. And then we have the 2 open spots. And in those open spots, one of the things that we wanted to do was create what I wanted to call the Rocky Balboa team. But I don't think Sylvester Stallone is going to let me do that, copyrights and all, So we're calling it the Grassroots All-Stars. But, we're taking drivers from that local area that are really good at that racetrack, or they're local heroes, and giving them a shot to race against the superstars. When we go to Stafford Springs, Connecticut, it's going to be Doug Coby, the 5-time NASCAR modified champion and Stafford Speedway track champion. When we go to Knoxville, it's going to be Brian Brown, the World of Outlaws driver, multi-time Knoxville Speedway champion, sprint car driver. And then when we go to Eldora, we're going to use Cody Swanson, multi-time USAC Silver Crown champion, the winningest driver in USAC Silver Crown history. And you think about the guys who've run that series, we're talking Andretti, Foyt, Stewart, Gordon, and Cody's he is the winningest USAC Silver Crown driver of all time. And then over to IRP, journeyman midget racer Bobby Santos. Midgets, modifieds. Bobby drives just about anything. I don't know how much Bobby drives with fenders on it, so that's got me a little bit worried. We might have to take his fenders off, but Bobby is set to run there. And then we've got some surprises lined up for Nashville. We're not ready to announce yet, but you may see some celebrity surprises pop in as we head down there. And that last spot, and again, I know I'm running long there, but we're bringing in. So with our Grassroots All-Star, then we're going to bring in a ringer. So when the ringers are about to be announced, and that means that we're bringing in somebody who, may be able to beat our superstars, maybe not, but they're going to be a well-known name in a position, and the reason they've been invited is because that they are more currently racing more than some of the drivers that we have, and they're very good in the type of car that we're using.
So if I'm doing the math right, will there be 12 cars?
12 cars at every event. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, again, using the old IROC format, 12 cars.
Yep. Well, that sounds great, man. We really appreciate the updates on SRX and wish it the best. Folks can obviously go there and see the races in person or watch the coverage on CBS Sports. Let's talk a little bit about shifting gears, literally, about a couple of vehicles, very important vehicles that are coming to the Big Mecum Indy auction. One of them, Ray, is a car that's very close to your heart. It's a 2001 Intrepid NASCAR car. You revitalized racing for Dodge back in 2001, creating the car. Bill Elliott, in fact, got the pole with this exact car. He finished 5th in the race. This is a car that's been in your personal collection since that time period, and it is coming to Mecum Indy. First of all, how do you deal with the potential of this car heading to a new home?
John, you and I talk about this a lot, and we've all been in the business a long time. There just comes time when you've got to let some of the things go. So, there's we're going to talk about the other special Dodges that'll be there, but it's time to let this one go out of my collection as I'm shrinking down and doing other things. But this is a car, really special car, because Bill Elliott Bill Elliott won one of the qualifying races, a 125-mile qualifier, actually in 2000 with this car. As a Taurus body. And then when I bought it from Bill, I put a Dodge body on it, and we went to Daytona. And in my first race as a Dodge owner, the 2001 Daytona 500, Dodge's return after 25 years being out of the Cup Series. Bill went there. We sat on the pole with this car, and then the car did finish fifth in the race. It came across the finish line damaged. Unfortunately, was involved in the terrible crash with Dale Earnhardt Sr. Got some damage, but made it across the line. And the car's been in my possession ever since. So the car is really original as it ran. We fixed up the damage and things like that. So it's been part of my collection for a long time. And the thing that makes it so unique is, again, not just sitting on the pole for Daytona 500 and Bill Elliott driving it, but the key is that when Dodge returned after 25 years, we took the whole front row for that race. Dodge's first and second, and again that is the 2001 Daytona pole-winning Dodge.
I'm curious to hear a little about it. You guys had a big engine program using Dodge Power. You mentioned this was had started life as a Taurus, but tell us how you were so competitive with that 358 cubic inch Dodge power plant right off of the bat.
Well, we did. It was a combination of motor and aero work. And as you know, that one thing the Dodge people have always been very interested in is motors, right? So they Dodge Mopar makes pretty good power. What the things that they've learned through the years when they got after with the cylinder heads and whatnot. And so I think some of their design people got with us, and we created this R5 P7. And an engine, as you know, is really a big air pump, right? And they are very good about cylinder placement and manifolds and cylinder heads and getting air in and out of those motors. And then once they continue to develop on the weight and picking up RPM, running higher temperatures and things like that. But at that time, I think the R5 P7 with the restrictor plate on it, because the motor really breathed very well, was just a little bit better at restrictor plate racing than some of the other competitors. And so much so that I think NASCAR changed the size of the restrictor plate shortly after we put all 10 cars in the Daytona 500.
That is Crossing the Block is lot number F187. For any listeners, can go right to mecum.com and take a look at the pictures. By the way, the published auction estimate on the Bill Elliott pole-winning car for the 01 Daytona 500 is $200,000 to $250,000. Ray, there's a companion car that is headed to Mecum, Indy as well. It's lot number F186. It's a 69 Dodge Hemi Daytona race car, of course. This is the first car to officially top 200 miles per hour in a closed course. That was done at Talladega with just a few ticks over 200 miles per hour. What a historic Mopar, expected to fetch in the $1 million range. What is your involvement with this car?
I actually partnered with a gentleman named Greg Kwiatkowski, who found this car, tracked it down. He's a former Chrysler employee, and Greg, for almost 30 years, has done nothing but research on this car. Wow. And acquired the many of the original parts. What Greg has done with the history of this car, I'm going to tell you, is incredible. And being a Chrysler employee, he was able to get original photos, original paperwork from that day, the original engine parts, body parts, things that were on that car, and the complete history from the time that car was built to the time Greg got it. Because the car has an incredibly interesting story. It's called DC-93, but it was actually the Chrysler test car, and it was stolen at one point, and then Chrysler got it back, and that's when they made it into a race car. And the list of drivers that have driven that car, Buddy Baker broke the 200 mile per hour barrier, and that was the first automobile or first race car to do it on a closed circuit. And that's ahead of IndyCar and everyone else. But Bobby Allison, Dan Gurney, Charlie Glotzback, list of cars. But it's been my shop here restored it, and it's been almost a 3-year restoration. And I can tell you that I love Greg Kwiatkowski like a brother now and a partner. But he drove me crazy with this thing, because I promise you, this is the most detailed and accurate race car restoration that I've ever done. When I'm telling you that Greg had measurements right down to where the rivets were placed, and we had to deal sometimes two or three times do the same thing over in this car because it just wasn't exactly like it was supposed to have been. Right down, John, we actually, this car was painted, like race cars were back then. People just got them and painted the outside of them, then they painted the inside, and they painted over this. Greg had accurately determined step by step how they originally painted this car and how that, what paint they used. And we actually did that. That when you go to the car and say, well, that color doesn't match that color or the inside, you're exactly right. And I can tell you that one of the hardest things to do is recreate something perfectly that's imperfect.
Well, it certainly does look authentic, and I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm kind of hesitating, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Was the restoration process done for static display, or will this car actually start, run, and drive? I got my fingers crossed.
Oh no! It starts, runs, drives.
Yes.
One of the original motors in that car, motor, transmission, gear. The car's really authentic. I'm not going to get in and go and try and run 200, but I bet it'd get damn close. I'll have to get some of the drive. We built it to go back out, and the only reason, again, I say that when a car is 50 years old, you don't know what the inside of the roll bars and the frame and things. So you're not going to go and try and go fast. It's certainly not going to go 200 on the racetrack right now, but it is as in race condition. There's nothing I would look at. I wouldn't be worried about anything other than how old the frame and roll bars are in that car. If you said, hey, are you going to go to Talladega with it? Goodyear might have to say something about the tires because it's got some of the original tires on it. But, I said, John, I have never been part of a restoration that has been more painstakingly authentic as this car. And I will tell you that by doing that, many of the original nose and ductwork and all those things were found. Greg found the car at Don White's. The car had a different body from the windshield back changed at that time to a later Charger. And Don White had kept many of the other parts, including the original front fenders, hood, and nose cone from Superbird, the original wing from the Daytona, the original wing that is on it. With the actual Ray Nichols wheels, and so just the years and years and years of time that Greg spent putting getting all this documentation. We literally took the time to restore it the same fashion because we had the information to do it.
Well, just a last comment from us, Ray. First of all, really appreciate you taking some time from the busy schedule to talk to us. Thank you so much for entrusting these two vehicles to the big Mecum Indy auction, and absolute best success with the SRX Racing Series. We're really looking forward to checking that out and keeping everybody posted on that as well. And safe travels on your journey this summer, my friend.
Well, thank you. I appreciate both you guys having me on. I know time goes so fast, but you know me, John. All you got to do is start talking about cars, and I'm good for hours.
Don't adjust that dial. On the Move, we'll be right back. Our program is proudly presented by Mecum Auctions, the world's largest collector car auctions. Now back to Matt and John.
We said it earlier, John, that today is very special as it marks the kickoff to Dana Mecum's 34th Original Spring Classic, which is held in Indianapolis, Indiana, and by all accounts, it is a must-see and must-attend event for all automotive enthusiasts. There is so much excitement, thousands of cars crossing the block, so much to see, so much to do. And John, I think there's a lot of listeners out there that are curious to learn, how did this whole thing get started? Take us back, John, all the way back to the very first instance of the event, held in 1988 at the Rockford, Illinois airport. Give us an idea. How does this whole thing get started?
Yeah, it's all about the vision, Matt, of Dana Mecum, his wife, Patty Mecum. The story's been told so many times, but worth repeating, literally sketching out the very first Mecum auction to be held in 1988. It was at the Greater Rockford Airport, and it really did set the stage for all the auctions that have continued. You mentioned, of course, Indianapolis, Indiana. That's where it's located at now. First year for the big move to the Indiana State Fairgrounds actually goes all the way back to 2000. 2008. And this is, of course, the 34th annual event. I do like to refer to it as the granddaddy of all Mecum auctions. We know that it's an auction that Dana Mecum himself personally very, very proud of, and it has established itself as the Mecum Muscle Car Auction of the Year.
Let's put some context on this event. In particular, let's compare it to last year's 2020 event, because that was that marked one of the first instances of live automotive events returning as we move past this pandemic era. And even that was a record-setting event. So let's do a little bit of comparison. How do these two events stack up?
Yeah, this is really good, Matt. We're going to compare 2020 to 2021. And I think the first thing to point out is last year's auction was moved from the traditional May date to July because of the pandemic, of course. But once the smoke had cleared on that auction, Matt, a new all-time Mecum record at that time in 33 years for a whopping $74 million in sales. Once again, the most successful auction, the most successful spring classic in Mecum history. Fast forward to today, 2021, we are gearing up to potentially even exceed those record results from last year. We had about 1,800 vehicles last year. We've got over 2,000 this year. This auction spans 9 long days. We've got 6 days of television coverage on NBCSN. It is the entire collector car world, Matt, is laser focused on this auction. Will the continued success of Mecum auctions and the strength of the collector car market march on, or is it going to start to kind of ease off a bit? My prediction, and we're going to know here pretty soon, is that this auction is going to be incredibly successful, and it's going to be documented as a real landmark, showing once and for all as we move into the summer season that the collector car market is really strongly established. It's a great diversion from all the drama we've all been dealing with over the past year.
As you mentioned, John, there are so many great consignments that are crossing the block, and you and I, for today's show, have gone through and found something that really caught our eye. I'll lead off with what my pick is. It is lot number F118. It's a 1969 Chevrolet Copo Camaro, meaning it was processed through Chevrolet's central office and thus was equipped with an iron block L72 427 cubic inch V8 engine, but this one is made even more special, having been modified by famed drag racer Dick Harrell. Dick was so instrumental to the first-gen Camaro performance program. Besides racing himself, he also was involved with Nicky Chevrolet getting their performance Camaro program developed and launched. He also spent time with Don Yanko, helping to develop his performance Camaro program. And then finally, Dick opens up his own shop and does his own performance Camaro program, which is where this car would have been modified. And John, you and I both know Copo Camaros are red hot to collectors. They're ultra desirable, and this one has that added interest of having the Dick Harrell connection. So I'm really excited to see this one cross the block, and I'm fully confident that when it does, it can bring upwards of $250,000, a very desirable collectible piece. Now, John, what about you? What really stuck out?
Well, I'm going to stay in the GM F-Body family, Matt, but I'm going to jump up to the second gen and switch gears and go from Chevy to Pontiac with a 1973 Pontiac Trans Am that, by the way, this exact car was my high school dream car. What is it, you say? Brewster Green, one of only 3 colors that were available in the Trans Am in 73. There was Buccaneer Red, Cameo White, and Brewster Green, and only 146 people decided that they wanted to order their 73 Trans Am in that really cool color. This one has got the standard 455 cubic inch engine. That was the base engine, believe it or not, in 1973, but it does have the 4-speed manual transmission, Rally 2 wheels, black interior. Guess the value on that one, Matt, to be somewhere in the $75,000 to $100,000 range. And man, oh man, like I said earlier, this is the exact car I wanted in high school. I was a junior when it came out, and I had all the brochures and even had spec'd it out back in the day on how I would order one, and never did, but I get a chance to relive almost 50 years of memories. That's pretty crazy.
You've been listening to Mecum Presents On the Move, brought to you by State Farm. For more information, visit Mecum.com. And join us again next time as we take you inside the world of muscle and collector cars and more.